Hello, boys and girls. Today we're going to be reading a story, but as we're reading, I'm going to have you think about that strategy of cause and effect. So remember from the previous video that you watched, and we've talked about this before, cause and effect is when something happens and we look at why it happened, okay? On page 262 in your squirrel book, so page 262 in your squirrel book, we have a graphic organizer for cause and effect. And as we're reading our story today, we're going to be looking at some causes and some effects. First, we're going to fill out our cause side, and as we're reading, I want you to think about the effects. So for example, in our story, we learn about hot steel, and we're going to learn that hot steel like a metal, not steel like I stole something, but hot steel like hot metal. What happens when hot steel gets cold? So that's our first cause. So hot steel gets cold, and as we're reading, I want you to think about what happens because of that. What's the effect? Hot steel gets cold, what happens? Another cause that we're going to look at is when workers wear a helmet. So we're going to be looking at a story where workers are working on a ship. And so workers wear a helmet and gloves. So what happens? This is the cause. The workers wear a helmet and gloves. What happens because of that? What's the effect? And the last cause we're going to look at is a joint. A joint meaning like when two things come together. A joint leaks on a ship. So what's the effect when there's a joint on the ship where two parts come together and it's leaking, so water's getting through it? What happens? What's the effect? Okay, let's go ahead. If you need to copy these, I want you to pause the video and get these. So we have hot steel gets cold, workers wear a helmet and gloves, and a joint leaks on a ship. So these are our causes. What happens because of these things? What's the effect? So let's start our story. So our essential question is, how do things get built? And today we're going to read about how a ship gets built. And the genre is nonfiction. So we're going to be reading about true facts, right? This is not make-believe. Nonfiction means it's true. And this comes from the magazine Time for Kids. So our title says, and I'm going to move this down a little bit. Our title is The Joy of a Ship. Look at that. It's enormous. It says ships take people and things all over the world. How does a ship get made? Find out here. And as we're reading, keep in mind those cause and effects that we were looking for. So what happens when steel gets cold? Workers wear a helmet and gloves. And what happens when a joint leaks on a ship? What is needed to build a ship? Making ships employs many workers. This task uses lots of tools and parts as well. Let's see how a ship is made, step by step. And then over here we have a caption for the picture. It says, these people study the plans for the ship. There are many things to do. So this is just the beginning stages. And there are many, it says, making ships employs many workers. So many people have to work on this ship. Okay, step 1, frame it. First, workers build a frame. The ship frame can balance on blocks up above a dock. Huge cranes hoist the big parts in place so they do not fall. Workers must avoid being bumped by these big pieces of steel. And our caption says, some huge gantry cranes can lift 1,500 tons as high as 230 feet in the air. Whoa, that's enormous. So right now they just have the frame of the ship, and then you have these cranes that are pulling up the big pieces to place them where they need to go. Oh, I see steel, and that was one of our causes. It says sheets of steel. First, two kinds of metal are melted into steel. It boils. Hot steel flows into flat metal sheets and molds. When steel gets cold, it gets hard. The steel sheets are then ready for making a ship. Stand back. The steel is very hot. So they use two types of metals. Some facts that we learn here is that they're used two kinds of metals and they're melted into steel. It boils, and when the steel is boiled, it flows into flat metal sheets and molds. And when the steel gets cold, it gets hard. Then the steel sheets are used for making the ship. So that makes me think of our cause and effect sheet. One of the causes was that hot steel gets cold. So what's the effect of hot steel getting cold? What happens? We read about that here right now. What happens when hot steel gets cold? Hot steel flows into flat metal sheets and molds. When steel gets cold, it gets hard. So that's our effect. Hot steel gets cold is the cause. So how does it get hard? Hot steel gets cold, and then the steel gets hard. So our effect is that the steel gets hard. And remember, we're talking about metal, not like steel. So cause hot steel gets cold, the steel gets hard. So they melt it to form different parts of the ship, and when it gets cold, it gets hard again. A worker joins each steel section by heating the edges called joints. Most workers put on gloves and a helmet to protect their hands and head. Ah, this reminds me of another cause. What happens? A worker joins each steel of section by heating the edges. So this little tool here is used to heat the edges, and they're called joints. Most workers put on gloves and a helmet to protect their hands and head. That reminds me of our other cause. It says workers wear a helmet and gloves. What happens because of that? What's the effect? Workers wear a helmet and gloves. Why do they wear that? What happens to them? Most workers put on gloves and a helmet to protect their hands and head. Ah, they wear a helmet and gloves to protect. So the workers head and hands are protected. So the cause is that they wear this protective gear, and the effect, what happens, is that now their hands and head are protected. Okay, let's keep reading. Our last cause is a joint leaks on a ship. So let's figure out what happens when a joint leaks on the ship. So remember, these guys are joining two pieces by heating them up, and that's called a joint. check it, paint it. Workers check all the joints. Then they point out leaks and fix them. If a joint leaks, the inside of the ship will be moist with water. It might even sink. So what happens if a joint leaks? The inside of the ship will be moist with water and it might even sink. So what happens if water's getting through that joint? If a joint leaks on a ship, it gets moist. Moist means like a little bit wet, not like super wet, but it's damp. There's a little bit of wetness there. The ship gets moist with water and it might even sink. So if water's getting through, the ship could sink. That's not good. So the cause, if a joint leaks on a ship, the effect is that it gets moist with water and it might sink. So this is what might happen. This is what happens because of this. So cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. What happens because of this? Let's read the rest of our story. It says, then the ship is painted and this job is done. It gleams in the sun. The workers knew it would look nice. People will pay a lot of money to ride on this ship. Look at all that. All these little windows are rooms where people get to stay. And then you have little lifeboats here. All the pieces of steel that they melted and formed are here. And look at the crane that's used to carry the big pieces. Out to sea. The people on the dock point with joy as the new ship begins the first trip. Those on the ship wave as it guides toward the open sea. Did you know there are many kinds of ships on the sea? There's the icebreaker ship. What do you think its job is? There's the aircraft carrier. What do you think they do? And then you have a cargo ship. What do you think they do? And I believe that is the end. Alrighty, boys and girls, that was it for today. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.